usually the West has been known as the ones who dictate the pace, who set the tone. This is one of the first times in my life where I saw China set the tone. And I've seen on the left where you use the term globalist, and it's like, whoa, conspiracy theories, you can't be talking about that. But it's like, its definition, globalization, essentially extracting as much value as possible and being able to essentially push down wages as much as possible. And that's what we're witnessing, and it's a deterioration of our society across the West. If you negotiate Kuzma, you get a deal, then that boogeyman's no longer there. And so that's really the reality that we're dealing with, is this is all big play for him to get reelected and get a majority.
So you think the real reason Carney's cozying up to China, it's all about money?
Journalism commentary 1 year anniversary.
I don't believe journalism being funded by the government is the solution.
Build a foundation.
You have to retell the stories.
Market conservative
Other news that actually matters.
I hence wanted to ask. I think they should answer their questions, especially if they're politically charged.
Hi, it's Ali Cantin-Nantel, and I'm here at the Conservative Convention in Calgary. And something that you will notice at this convention that wasn't the case last time is you have a lot of independent creators and influencers like myself, but there's lots of others that are also doing great work. And one of them is Josh Udall, who does the Elevate podcast, which has become a very popular podcast with both conservative Canadians and other Canadians in this country. And I had the chance to talk to him. We talked about the real reason why Mark Carney is cozying up to China. We talked about the Canada-U.S. filed, whether there will be a snap election this spring, and what the future of media looks like in Canada. So without further ado, here's our conversation. Well, I'm here in Calgary at the Conservative Convention with Josh Udall of the Elevate podcast. Josh, what brought you out here to the convention?
More so just wanted to get hands-on experience of what's happening here on the ground. Lots of conversation around the party, what's happening around Poilievre, and obviously a lot of conversation from a lot of voices outside the party of what should happen here and what is going to happen here. So just wanted to be here to be able to get a beat of what's happening so I can discuss it with my viewers of what we're seeing here live. And again, it's more so here for the viewers, here for my audience, so that I can give them the most accurate information possible and just tell them what we're seeing here.
Is this your first convention?
This will be my first convention, yes.
Very nice. Mm-hmm. So let's talk a bit about the issues you like to talk about your podcast. You're obviously a conservative podcast. I also do conservative media. Mm-hmm. There's been a lot of different types of conservatives over the years. And when I first got involved in the movement, you had the fiscal conservatives, the red Tories, the social conservatives, the populist conservatives. I kind of consider myself kind of populist, social conservative personally. Your audience, do you have different types of conservatives, and how do you bring everyone together the way that, let's say, Pierre has been able to in his movement?
Yeah, I think it comes down to kind of understand the core issues, and that we just want to have limited government, want people to enjoy their lives, be able to make money, and be able to afford raising families. It's fairly simple things. These are things that everybody in the conservative movement can agree upon. It's more so the social issues where you start seeing the divide and the fracture happening. And I understand, because we are the left-leaning parties in our country have waged a cultural war on our country and on our people here. So naturally, those are the things you're going to have to address as a party, and it's made a lot of people uncomfortable. However, when you look at the list of issues that are currently happening, the top of mind is concern for Canadians is cost of living.
Yes.
Next is the economy, and next is healthcare, and then fourth on the list is, well, Trump. But the top three things are much larger than those issues, and so that's the unity comes in. Is you focus on how you improve people's lives, how you improve the economy, and improve their affordability, and that's where you can unify people on, not just in the Conservative Party, but as well as the country.
Yeah, because, for real people, these are indeed real issues. You talked a bit about the culture war. There was a long time where the Conservative Party, some would argue, would just sit there while the left was waging a culture war. This was especially true under Aaron O'Toole. And under Aaron O'Toole, there was actually a lot of times where they went with it. I mean, Aaron O'Toole would tweet out pro-BLM, pro-gender ideology content. Under Pierre, it's kind of changed. Are you hoping Conservatives will continue to actually actively push back on the left and the woke and the culture wars and actually say, no, this is not the way to go. We shouldn't tear down the statues or other issues that have become culture war issues in recent years?
Yeah, I think it's where you can really help out on that issue is not focusing on the specific issues themselves, but focusing on what stems from those problems. Those things are waged on people, waged on our population to control behavior, control what they do, control what they say, control what they think.
Yes.
And that's where the focus should be attacking, is more so, what are the manipulative tactics that have been used, and how do you push back against them? And that's what we saw with Aaron O'Toole. Is like, yeah, I've been pretty public. I wasn't a huge fan of how he led the party. However, I understood why he did what he did. It's scary to be called racist. It's scary to be called homophobic, especially in those days.
Yes.
But things have been shifting, and the only reason they shift is because people pushed back against them. And so that's what we want to see in a leader. That's what we want to see in the Conservative Party moving forward, is being bold, and not so much maybe making an issue of specific culture war issues, but mainly pushing back on the tactics that are being used to manipulate people into behaving a certain way.
That's a very good point. Let's talk a bit about Mark Carney now. Mark Carney, I saw you did some reporting on your podcast about the China and Mark Carney. And we know Mark Carney went to China recently, and he talked about the New World Order. What are your thoughts on Carney seemingly cozying up to China?
It comes down to what his motives are, right? So we're seeing this whole tension take place on the global scale, the globalists versus nationalists. And what do globalists do? Well, it's easy to, I know I've seen on the left where you use the term globalist and it's like, whoa, conspiracy theories, you can't be talking about that. But it's like, its definition, globalization, essentially extracting as much value as possible and being able to essentially push down wages as much as possible, get to essentially purchase things for the cheapest amount, get it made by the cheapest labor possible. And that's what we're witnessing, and it's a deterioration of our society across the West, but as well as we're seeing in other parts of the nations where they're being utilized for this cheap labor. So that is where the New World Order is going. And again, when he said the New World Order, I wasn't so much thinking it in that conspiracy perspective, but more so the fact of, no, like Carney's trying to leverage the middle powers to make a new king. Well, USA is no king anymore because they're starting to take care of themselves now. Well, we'll just latch on to China then, and we'll latch on to their superpower. And that's kind of what we're seeing with the New World Order and the shifting of things. However, we've seen Keir Starmer, the UK, distance himself from Carney's statements in Davos, saying, yeah, nice middle powers, unite. We're good. We're not doing that. We have a good relationship with the United States, and we're going to keep it that way. And so we're seeing now Carney is standing alone on this issue. And so, and that's the problem. You've seen Trump putting pressure on if we get closer to China. This is all one big play to get as much money as possible at the end of the day.
So you think the real reason Carney's cozying up to China, it's all about money?
100%. It's about money, and it's about essentially trying to extract as much value as possible of the human population. We look at the EV situation. There was no pushback on like, hey, we should have those EVs made here. It was, we're just going to ship them in, because consumers want cheaper cars. And like that's what our population, that's what our country's being devolved to, is how much you can pay for something, rather than what are our values, what do we care about, and what do we stand for as Canadians.
Mark Carney, this whole thing, the last election, which I covered and you covered, it was all about stopping Trump and getting a deal. And we still don't have a deal. How do you think he's handled the Canada-U.S. file?
I think he's done so predictably. At this point in time, where we knew this was going to happen, was, hey, we'll get a deal by summertime, and we knew that wasn't going to happen, and it didn't happen. And here we are coming up on 12 months close to him being elected, and still nothing. And so much so, the deal idea is completely off the table. Now it's like, what's going to happen with COSMA? What's going to happen with the USMCA? And that is where the large concern is currently taking place with this issue. And so that's kind of where my headspace is at. It's not been done well, and it's been used as a leverage issue, because now we're seeing Carney spike in the polls after Davos, and Trump is talking about Greenland and all that situation, which is being resolved. But now it's like, well, now Trump is threatening more tariffs on us, and again, keep making the spookiness happen, have the boogeyman stay there, because if you negotiate CUSMA, you get a deal, then that boogeyman's no longer there. And so that's really the reality that we're dealing with. This is all big play for him to get reelected and get a majority.
Well, I've been speaking to some people who think there's going to be a spring snap election. Do you think we will see a snap election this spring?
Yes, 100%. We're seeing. I actually said this the day after Carney got elected, that we'll see an election within the next 12 to 18 months, and we're right on schedule to do that. Except for the fact is, we saw his favorability numbers declining since June. He was dropping like a rock. Then Davos happens, then Greenland happens, then Venezuela happens, and Minnesota happens, and all of a sudden, Canadians are terrified of Trump again. They're terrified of the U.S., and now Carney's spiked again. And it's right on time. We will see a spring election. And people will ask, well, why not do it now? Because things are going so well. It's like, well, his voting base doesn't like traveling in the wintertime. So he's going to wait for spring, and that's what we're going to see.
Let's conclude by talking a bit about your podcast. So what made you decide to start this podcast that's now been very popular amongst the conservative movement and other Canadians.
Well, believe it or not, it started as a business podcast, and over time, and I've always had a political background. I just always kept things to myself because I just didn't want to make that my personality at the time, and so as things got ramping up and kept getting crazier, I was like, man, this is I can't stay quiet for much longer, and that's kind of what was the issue. Is like my breaking point was when Nova Scotia is where I live currently, went to the vax passes, and I just felt like that was such an affront to, or such an issue and an attack on our identity as Canadians, and as well as just being able to treat people with dignity in our country. And the thing I caught was, usually the West has been known as the ones who dictate the pace, who set the tone. This is one of the first times in my life where I saw China set the tone and had to deal with COVID. And I was like, wow, we just dealt with things in the way a dictatorship, a communist dictatorship would deal with things. And that was a huge alarm bell. And that's when I ended up talking more about, I talked about politics, and then people started tuning in more. And then that ended up becoming what the show ended up transitioning into. So here we are.
It was definitely a crazy moment. I mean, I myself continue to be astounded at what we were first subjected to, and the fact that so many people just went along with it. I mean, thank God that eventually people said enough, because, I think it would have not stopped had it not been for people, including finally the Conservatives under the new leader saying, Trudeau, enough is enough, and then he finally got rid of all of that.
Tamara Litch was just here earlier.
Oh, was she?
And I was about to point to her, like, she's a big reason why that shifted. The convoy, 100%. So, yeah.
I guess last question. Last convention I was here for True North, and there was only really independent media outlets and then legacy media. Now there's a lot of, we both have influencer passes. There's a lot of independent creators. I've gone independent, you're independent. Do you think that's the future of media for both conservative media, but also more broadly Canadian media, to have individuals with podcasting rather than bigger organizations? Or do you think there's going to be a mix of both? Because there are some people, including myself, who still like these both independent media organization and even legacy media.
Yeah, I think there will be a 100% hybrid approach.
Okay.
And I think we'll see that transition kind of like we're seeing in the States right now, where CBS got taken over by Barry Weiss.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing is more of a down the middle, boring news organization, which is what it should be.
Yes.
News should be boring, and we shouldn't be taking ideological stances if you're presenting the news. And the issue I always had, too, was even creators like myself who are like, we're the new media, we're taking... I'm like, no. That should never happen. That actually is a bad thing if we take over the space, because now we have one viewpoint who's dominating and giving the perspective on things. And I tell people straight up, like I'm biased, but I'm fair. And that's what I try to take on it. But the news is like, we need people who are down the middle and who are apolitical for that to be a healthy democracy. So I think we still have a role to play to kind of break down the news and see what's happening. But the news needs to get back to its roots. We need to see CBC become what CBC used to be, and we need to see, or at the very minimum, we could see this. CBC disappears and does something very different, and CPAC does what they need to do. And CPAC is the one that fills that role void.
Well, I can clearly relate to that, because personally, I've always been an opinion journalist, but my big role is I don't want to misinform, and also I don't want to malinform, which means only give one side of the story. I don't want my audience to learn that this is other side. So what I will do on my show is we'll dedicate entire sections to talking about the left's issues, and we'll because its opinion will kind of dismantle the arguments. But I really do think it is really important for independent media to not replace the legacy media as in the bad ways. It needs to actually be better if we're going to have more of a space. So I agree with that.
Yeah, 100%. And again, I think significant reform needs to happen. If you don't reform, then you got to go away. I'll say that much.
No, I totally agree. Well, this was Josh Udall of the Elevate podcast. Thank you so much for joining EMCN Media for an interview.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for having me, and a pleasure. And I love you guys' work. Continue what you're doing.
Thank you.
Awesome.
That concludes our interview. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to like, share, subscribe, comment down below. And if you enjoy independent media, then consider becoming a paid member or supporter or contributing to our Conservative Convention Fund, because I don't take any government money, so trips like these are entirely self-funded. Until next time, God bless.